The highway at night carries a silence that feels different from any other kind. It is not a peaceful stillness, nor a natural pause in the world's noise. It feels like something deliberate, as if the darkness itself is waiting for a reason to move. On a cold stretch of asphalt cutting through barren land, a passing driver once reported something that pulled the silence tighter than usual. He claimed that he saw a shape crossing the road just beyond the reach of his headlights, a shadow that did not keep to the rhythm of anything he recognized. It moved as if it did not understand how a living body should behave. The man had driven this route for years without fear, but that night he slowed down because his mind needed to confirm that his eyes had not betrayed him. He wanted to believe that he had seen a person, an animal, even a trick of the light. But when his headlights slid across the empty stretch of pavement, he did not see anything there. No figure, no movement, no trace that something had ever been present. Only the road, still and blank, as if swallowing every footprint that had ever touched it. He told himself that he might be tired, that the long hours behind the wheel could have created an illusion. Yet, as he continued driving, a cold pressure began to creep beneath his ribs. The thought that kept returning to him was not that he had seen too much, but that he had not seen enough. The shadow had crossed the highway in a way that did not feel accidental. It moved with precision, as if it knew exactly where the darkness was thickest and where the light could not reach. It did not hesitate or stumble. It did not run. It slid, and the motion carried a strange rhythm, something wrong in the way its limbs bent or failed to bend. And the driver, who prided himself on being a rational man, found his hands shaking on the wheel in a way he could not control. He tried to describe it later, but each attempt broke apart. He said it was tall, but not tall in a way that made sense. He said it was thin, but not fragile. It was like the shadow of a person stretched across a wall, except no wall existed there. He tried to explain how the shape's head turned slightly toward him without moving like a human head should turn, as if the neck rotated more than it should, or not enough, or in a direction that contradicted the curve of the body. He could not be certain. He could not even swear it had a face. Only he remembered that something inside him reacted before his reasoning could catch up. His instincts recoiled, as if his body recognized a predator that his eyes had no name for. The highway seemed different after that moment. The air felt thinner, as if the open land around him had been hollowed out. The wind felt colder even though the windows were closed, and as he drove, he caught himself glancing at the side mirrors and the edges of the road, searching for a shape that he hoped he would not see again. He did not have an explanation for any of it. He only had the lingering image of a shadow that moved with intention, as if aware of him, as if curious. When he finally reached the next town, he pulled into a dimly lit gas station and sat there for several minutes with the engine running. The lights overhead flickered, washing the empty lot in pulses of pale, uneven brightness. He tried to calm his breathing. He tried to convince himself that no shadow could follow him, no matter how unnatural it appeared. Yet he could not bring himself to get out of the car. He stared at the glass door of the station, half expecting to see a tall, thin outline standing inside, watching him through the flicker of the lights. He did not tell the cashier what he had seen. He did not tell anyone for several days. The words felt heavy, as if speaking them aloud would give shape to something that should remain unspoken. But the silence did not help. It clung to him, dragging itself through the corners of his thoughts. At night, he would close his eyes and feel the same cold pressure beneath his ribs, the same sensation of unseen movement just outside the glow of the headlights. He felt watched, though he could not say by what. He wondered if the shadow had been waiting on that highway for someone to notice it. He wondered if it had chosen him. And so the question lingered, colder than the night he encountered it. The highway where the man saw the shadow is not the kind of place that draws attention. It stretches between scattered towns that seem to shrink a little more every year, passing through empty fields, dead trees, and stretches of land where the wind sounds louder than any human presence. People who live in the area accept the isolation the same way they accept the changes in weather. They grow used to long nights, thin radio signals, and the kind of silence that lingers after midnight like a thought no one wants to acknowledge. Outsiders rarely travel this road unless they are passing through. Locals insist that the land has always been strange, even before there was streetlights or painted lane dividers. They say that the soil feels older than its age, as if something beneath it has been waiting longer than the highway itself has existed. The driver had grown up several towns away and the route was familiar to him. He had taken it during rainstorms, fog, winter nights, and hot summer afternoons. He never believed in the stories that drifted across conversations in gas stations or late-night diners. Most of them were nothing more than warnings from older residents who wanted to keep children close to home or discourage travelers from taking unnecessary risks. Talk of strange figures, sudden disappearances, or voices carried by the wind had always sounded like the remains of older superstitions. Yet the land carried a heaviness that layered itself into memory. It was not fear, it was something quieter, something that kept a person alert even when there should be no reason to feel watched. The witness did not think of himself as someone who frightened easily. His life was built on routines that kept him grounded. Long hours of work, long drives, and long nights where he relied on repetition more than comfort. He lived alone, though he never described himself as lonely. Silence was a companion he understood. The highway was an extension of that silence, a place where he could think without interruption. He had never experienced anything on the road that made him question reality. The land around him stayed predictable even on the worst nights. Or so he believed. Before the night of the sighting, he noticed subtle changes that did not feel significant at the time. A deer carcass left near the edge of the road, too neatly arranged to be the result of an accident. A set of tire marks that swerved for no clear reason, ending abruptly as if the vehicle had simply vanished. A stray dog standing in the middle of the road one evening, staring into the fields with its body rigid and its ears flattened, as if listening to something he could not hear. The dog did not look at him when he slowed down. It only turned and walked toward the darkness, disappearing faster than it should have. A week before the incident, a farmer from nearby land mentioned something unusual while speaking to a small group of customers at a diner. He said he heard footsteps outside his home late at night, heavy enough to press into the soil, but when he went out with a flashlight, the ground showed no sign of any tracks. This would not have been strange if the soil had been frozen or dry, yet it had rained earlier that day. The earth should have been soft. He insisted that he heard breathing near the porch, a slow, steady pool of air that did not match any animal he knew. The other customers dismissed him politely, but a quiet tension settled over the room. People did not argue about strange things in this area. They only stopped talking about them. There were also older stories that rarely resurfaced except when someone new tried to ask why the highway seemed different after nightfall. People spoke of silhouettes that crossed the fields in the early hours of the morning, long before sunrise, moving in a way that did not resemble any creature known to live there. They spoke of a person who claimed to have seen something crawl across the road and stand upright as if learning how to balance. That story faded with time, swallowed by disbelief and forgetfulness, but the witness remembered the tone of the old teller's voice. It did not hold fear. It held fatigue, as if describing something that refused to remain buried. The man never expected any of those fragments to matter. He kept his life simple, organized, and quiet. But silence can hide more than it reveals, and land that holds too much history can disguise things that do not belong in daylight. The night he saw the shadow, he realized that the highway he trusted carried a story far older than any rumor. There are places where the world feels thin, where the distance between what is seen and unseen narrows. That stretch of road had always been one of them. And as he drove through that isolation, unaware of what waited ahead, the land watched him the same way he had once watched the fields. The night did not change. His perception did. Something in the quiet was shifting, preparing to reveal a presence that should not have crossed his path.
In the days leading up to the sighting, the highway began to feel different in ways that were difficult to describe but impossible to ignore. The witness noticed it first in the way the air seemed heavy, as if carrying a weight that did not belong to weather or temperature. He drove the same route he had driven for years, but the familiar landmarks no longer gave him the sense of orientation they once did. The fields appeared darker even before the sun fully set, and the sky above them looked drained, as if the color had been pulled from it. He told himself that long hours and exhaustion could bend perception, yet the feeling stayed with him every time he passed the same stretch of road. It was as if something unseen had begun to settle into the landscape, waiting for a moment to reveal itself. The first clear sign that something was wrong occurred one evening when he noticed a smear of light flickering near the horizon. At first he assumed it was a distant vehicle, but the motion did not match the steady rhythm of headlamps. It wavered, almost pulsing, slipping in and out of view between the silhouettes of dead trees. He slowed down instinctively, watching the faint brightness move. It vanished abruptly, leaving a hollow feeling in his chest. He drove on, telling himself it could have been a reflection. Yet the emptiness of the land made that explanation feel fragile. The light had seemed alive, almost as if it had been watching him. Then there were the reports drifting between towns. A trucker claimed he saw something crouched beside the road late at night, its shoulders rising and falling in slow cycles as if it were waiting to spring forward. When he passed it, the shape did not turn toward him. It simply continued to sway. Another man said he found a broken fence on his property with the wire bent inward instead of outward, as if something had forced its way inside rather than out. He spent the next night awake on his porch, holding a flashlight he refused to turn off. A woman said she heard scratching along the outside of her trailer and assumed it was a stray animal. The next morning, she found no tracks, no marks, no sign of anything moving around her home, only the lingering sound in her memory, too slow and deliberate to match any canine or cat. The witness did not consider any of these stories relevant to him. The land always carried rumors. Rural isolation could amplify fear, shaping shadows into imagined danger. But on the night before he saw the figure, something happened that pulled those scattered accounts together in his mind. He was driving at a steady pace when he noticed a patch of fog ahead. It surprised him because the night sky was clear and the temperature had not changed. Fog appeared only in certain conditions, and this one appeared too suddenly, too concentrated. It hovered low, thick enough to obscure the road markings. As he drove through it, his headlights cut through the density, revealing something on the pavement. At first he thought it was debris, but as the light approached, he realized it was a perfectly arranged line of small stones, smooth, spaced evenly, as if someone or something had placed them one by one across the center of the road. He slowed to a crawl, staring at the neat pattern. No child would be out here at night. No person would have a reason to leave such a line in a place where no one would see it. He felt watched as he drove over the stones, the crunch beneath his tires sounding unnaturally loud in the fog. When he checked his rearview mirror, the fog was already thinning, dissolving into the night air. The stones were gone. He blinked hard, trying to reassure himself that the pattern had existed, that he had not imagined it. The fog dissipated too quickly for nature. It felt staged. The night of the encounter came with a quiet that did not resemble any silence he had known. The moon hung low, its light failing to reach the ground with its usual clarity. The fields on either side of the road seemed deeper than usual, as if the darkness within them had thickened, drawing in the surrounding air. He felt a pressure behind his eyes, a sense that something had shifted in the unseen corners of the landscape. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, feeling the subtle tremor in his fingers. Fatigue did not explain it. The feeling came from somewhere deeper. He approached the section of road where the land flattened abruptly, creating a long, open view between distant tree clusters. It was here that the shadow appeared. He did not see it emerge. It simply existed between one blink and the next, already halfway across the pavement. The shape seemed to materialize from the darkness itself, its outline blurred yet unmistakably upright. It moved slowly but with purpose, each step carrying a fluidity that felt wrong. The limbs did not swing. The spine did not bend. The shape advanced as if sliding on an invisible rail. He felt his heart thud against his ribs, a warning he had no words for. His instincts screamed for him to stop, to turn around, to retreat. But he continued forward because fear held him locked in place. His headlights approached the figure's edge, illuminating the slightest curve of its form. It did not resemble a person. It did not resemble anything that had the right to walk on two legs. And in that instant, before he could process the full shape, the shadow turned its head toward him. Something in the angle did not belong to this world. In the hours after the sighting, the witness tried to steady himself by focusing on facts he believed he understood. He repeated to himself that he had seen only a shape, not a creature, not a person, not anything he needed to fear. But each attempt to place the experience into a familiar category broke apart the moment he remembered the angle of its head. That unnatural tilt replayed in his mind with a clarity that seemed sharper than reality itself. The more he thought about it, the more he began to notice details he had not processed in the moment. The absence of sound, for example. The figure moved across the pavement without producing a single noise, not even the faint scrape of a foot on asphalt. Even the wind seemed to fall still when it appeared, as if nature had stepped aside to let it pass. He spent the next morning searching for explanations that could satisfy him. He reviewed the memory of the encounter several times, each time examining it like a photograph held under different light. But the more he studied it, the stranger it seemed. The body shape had been elongated, yet not in a way that suggested deformity. It had symmetry, a precision that looked deliberate, almost engineered. The legs moved with a smoothness that did not match any known gait. They did not bend where they should have bent, and yet they did not break the illusion of walking. It was as if the figure had learned the idea of human movement without understanding the mechanics behind it. Other witnesses had described similar traits in previous encounters, though their accounts were scattered and inconsistent. A trucker driver passing through the region years ago claimed he saw something crouched near a drainage ditch, its arms wrapped around its legs. When he passed it, the shape did not turn toward him. It simply continued to sway. Another man said he found a broken fence on his property with the wire bent inward instead of outward, as if something had forced its way inside rather than out. He spent the next night awake on his porch, holding a flashlight he refused to turn off. A woman said she heard scratching along the outside of her trailer and assumed it was a stray animal. The next morning, she found no tracks, no marks, no sign of anything moving around her home. Only the lingering sound in her memory, too slow and deliberate to match any canine or cat. The witness did not consider any of these stories relevant to him. The land always carried rumors. Rural isolation could amplify fear, shaping shadows into imagined danger. But on the night before he saw the figure, something happened that pulled those scattered accounts together in his mind. He was driving at a steady pace when he noticed a patch of fog ahead. It surprised him because the night sky was clear and the temperature had not changed. Fog appeared only in certain conditions, and this one appeared too suddenly, too concentrated. It hovered low,
thick enough to obscure the road markings. As he drove through it, his headlights cut through the density, revealing something on the pavement. At first he thought it was debris, but as the light approached, he realized it was a perfectly arranged line of small stones. Smooth, spaced evenly, as if someone or something had placed them one by one across the center of the road. He slowed to a crawl, staring at the neat pattern. No child would be out here at night. No person would have a reason to leave such a line in a place where no one would see it. He felt watched as he drove over the stones, the crunch beneath his tires sounding unnaturally loud in the fog. When he checked his rearview mirror, the fog was already thinning, dissolving into the night air. The stones were gone. He blinked hard, trying to reassure himself that the pattern had existed, that he had not imagined it. The fog dissipated too quickly for nature. It felt staged. The night of the encounter came with a quiet that did not resemble any silence he had known. The moon hung low, its light failing to reach the ground with its usual clarity. The fields on either side of the road seemed deeper than usual, as if the darkness within them had thickened, drawing in the surrounding air. He felt a pressure behind his eyes, a sense that something had shifted in the unseen corners of the landscape. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, feeling the subtle tremor in his fingers. Fatigue did not explain it. The feeling came from somewhere deeper. He approached the section of road where the land flattened abruptly, creating a long, open view between distant tree clusters. It was here that the shadow appeared. He did not see it emerge.
In the days that followed, the witness discovered that the most difficult part of the encounter was not what he saw on the highway. It was what remained with him afterward, the way the memory clung to him like a cold residue that refused to fade. He tried to return to his routine, tried to convince himself that normal life could continue if he ignored the unease pressing against the back of his mind. But the moment he closed his eyes, the darkness behind his eyelids shifted into that same unnatural shape. The shadow replayed itself, not as a clear image, but as an echo of motion, a quiet reminder of something that should not have existed. He felt as if the encounter had taken something from him, a piece of his certainty, something he could not name, but could feel slipping away. Sleep became difficult. He would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sense of being watched to pass, but it never did. Even in the safety of his home, he felt a presence in the corners of the room, unseen but undeniable. It was not paranoia in the traditional sense. It was not fear of a person or an intruder or any danger he could describe. It was the sense that something had followed him, not physically, but through memory, through the invisible space where thought and instinct meet. He felt as if the creature had imprinted itself onto him, as if the angle of its head had become a symbol that no part of his mind could escape. He began avoiding the highway entirely. Instead of taking the direct route home, he drove through side roads that stretched his drive by nearly an hour. Even those routes brought no comfort. Every shadow between the trees looked too tall. Every flicker of movement in his peripheral vision felt deliberate. He found himself locking the doors of his truck more often than usual, glancing into the back seat at stoplights, double-checking the windows of his home. His world shrank into a small bubble of effort, a quiet desperation to create boundaries the memory could not cross. But the moment he closed his eyes, the darkness behind his eyelids shifted into that same unnatural shape. The shadow replayed itself, not as a clear image, but as an echo of motion, a quiet reminder of something that should not have existed. He felt as if the encounter had taken something from him, a piece of his certainty, something he could not name, but could feel slipping away. The people around him noticed the change before he did. He spoke less. He avoided conversation. A coworker asked him if he felt unwell, and he responded with a neutral expression, unsure how to describe what weighed on him. How could he explain that his mind replayed the turn of a shadow's head more vividly than any real human face he had seen that week? How could he admit that he felt as if something had looked at him with curiosity, as if it had measured him? He knew that if he voiced such thoughts aloud, they would sound like a crack forming in his sanity. But silence grew heavier the longer he carried it. The nights became worse. He started waking in the early hours of the morning, drenched in cold sweat, certain that something had moved near his window. He would lie still, listening to the dark, waiting for a sound that never came. The absence of noise felt louder than anything he could imagine. He began leaving the hallway light on, not for illumination, but to create a barrier between himself and the dark spaces of his own home. When he tried sleeping with the lights off, he felt a pressure near the foot of his bed, as if the air thickened with the shape of something too still to be living. The psychological impact extended beyond him. Word of his encounter spread quietly among the nearby residents, and the small towns along the highway began to feel the weight of collective unease. People stopped driving after sunset unless absolutely necessary. Children refused to sleep with their curtains open. Some residents began installing new locks on their doors, even though no break-ins had occurred. The fear did not come from a threat they could see or touch. It came from the idea that something unknown had crossed the boundary between imagination and reality. And once something crosses that boundary, it becomes impossible to force it back. The witness felt guilt for sparking this fear, even though he had shared the details reluctantly. He did not want to be responsible for unsettling anyone else. Yet, in a strange way, hearing that others felt the same creeping dread brought him a fragile sense of validation. It meant he had not imagined the presence on the highway. It meant the darkness had changed for others too, not just him. The more the community struggled to ignore the fear, the stronger it seemed to grow. Some claimed they heard footsteps outside at night, slow and spaced too widely to match any known animal. Others said they saw movement near the tree line, but could not describe the shape. The fear became a quiet current running beneath daily life, something unspoken, yet shared. And through it all, the witness carried the memory of that moment on the road, the instant the shadow turned its head. Because deeply buried in that memory was a truth he could not admit aloud. The creature did not look surprised when it saw him. It looked aware. It looked familiar with the act of being watched. And in that realization lay a cold question that haunted him more than the sighting itself. In the weeks that followed, the witness found himself entangled in conversations he did not want, drawn into questions he could not answer. The authorities, pressured by anxious residents and a growing sense of unease in nearby towns, opened a quiet investigation. It was not an official operation with public statements or organized searches. It was subtle, cautious, and deliberately understated, as if the officers themselves did not want to draw attention to something that should not exist in any rational report. They visited the stretch of highway where the sighting occurred, sweeping their flashlights over the asphalt and the surrounding fields, searching for footprints, tire marks, or any evidence of a person crossing the road. They found nothing. The grass was undisturbed. The soil carried no impressions. The road remained smooth and untouched, except for the usual passing of vehicles, as if the creature had crossed without placing weight upon the world at all. One officer, an older man who had lived in the region his entire life, offered the first theory. He suggested that the witness had seen a vagrant or a drifter passing through the area. People lost in their own lives sometimes wandered across isolated highways. But even as he spoke, it was clear he did not believe his own explanation. The description did not match the thin, unnatural shape the witness had shared. A person does not cross a highway without the slightest shift in posture. A person cannot move with a gliding motion that ignores the unevenness of the pavement. The officer ended the conversation with a quiet remark that lingered far longer than any official theory. He said that the land had always carried stories that did not belong in reports. He said the darkness in that area behaved differently, and perhaps the witness had glimpsed something he was never meant to see. A younger member of the investigative team suggested a more scientific explanation. He theorized that the witness had experienced a form of highway hypnosis, a dissociative state brought on by long hours of monotonous driving. In such a state, the mind can project illusions into the visual field, creating shapes that appear real despite having no physical presence. But when questioned privately, the younger officer admitted that hallucinations do not produce consistent details, nor do they evoke the sense of awareness described by the witness. A hallucination does not look back. It does not turn its head toward a moving vehicle. It does not shift the air around it. Speculation deepened when residents from nearby towns began sharing their own stories with the investigators. None of these accounts aligned perfectly, yet each carried a similar core: a tall figure, a strange gait, a sense of intention. One man reported seeing something standing near a barbed wire fence late at night. He said the figure appeared to examine the fence, leaning close without touching it. When he flashed his high beams, the figure moved away too quickly for any human to match. Another account came from a woman who claimed she saw a silhouette standing beneath a broken streetlight. The light flickered, illuminating only fragments of its shape. Each time the bulb glowed, the figure appeared closer, though she never saw it move between flashes. Paranormal theories soon surfaced. Some residents whispered about older folklore, stories passed down through generations, too vague to be traced, but